I am 68 years old, a widower, and I thought that after a lifetime of hard work, sacrifices, and loyalty to my family, I would be allowed to spend my final years in peace inside the house I built with my own two hands. But last month, I discovered that my only son had sold that house behind my back, not rented it, not mortgaged it, not asked me for permission. He sold it as if I were already dead, as if I no longer existed. And the worst part was not even the betrayal itself. The worst part was the look in his eyes when I confronted him, that cold calculation, the way a predator stares at prey. He looked at me not as a father, not even as a human being, but as an obstacle standing between him and money he believed was already his. It was a Thursday afternoon when the shock landed on me. I had gone for my usual walk around the neighborhood, the same route I had walked for decades, my cane tapping against the pavement, nodding to neighbors who had known me since I first moved into that house with my late wife. When I turned the corner and approached my property, I froze. A man I had never seen before was pacing the front yard with a clipboard, measuring distances, writing notes, taking photographs. For a moment I thought maybe he was a city inspector. But then I saw the logo on his car, a real estate agency. He looked at me with polite indifference and said, "Are you here to view the property? It's going to be listed this week." I felt the ground open under my feet. View the property? List it this week? This was my home. I had laid the bricks with my own hands after returning from the war. Every corner carried memories of my wife's laughter, of my son's first steps, of family dinners, of Christmases, of birthdays. And now it was being listed like a commodity, as if the life I had built inside those walls meant nothing. I told the man there must be a mistake. He frowned, checked his papers, and said, "According to the documents, the property was already sold. The new owner asked us to take the preliminary photos today." I stumbled inside, my heart pounding like a drum. The house smelled of furniture polish and faintly of the roses I always kept on the kitchen table in memory of my wife. But something else filled the air. Voices. My son and his wife were in the living room. They looked startled when they saw me. My son Max stood up quickly, hiding the folder he had been reviewing. Lena, my daughter-in-law, smirked, as if she had been waiting for this confrontation. "Dad," Max began, his voice unsteady, "you're home early." I demanded to know what was going on. He hesitated. Then Lena cut in smoothly. "Don't be upset. We arranged everything for your own good. The house is too big for you. You don't need all this space. We're helping you downsize." Downsize? That word felt like an insult spat in my face. I wasn't some useless piece of furniture to be downsized. This was my life, my fortress, the symbol of every sacrifice I had ever made. I turned to Max, hoping he would contradict her, tell me this was a misunderstanding. But he avoided my gaze. He had signed the documents. He had betrayed me. The rage rose inside me, a volcano erupting after years of silence. "You sold my house?" I asked, my voice shaking not from weakness, but from fury. Max looked away, then muttered, "It's not just your house. One day it will be mine anyway. We only made things easier." Those words hit me harder than any blow. One day it will be mine anyway. In his mind, I was already gone. My existence was nothing but an inconvenience, a delay in his inheritance. Lena added cruelly, "You should be grateful. With the money, we can pay off our debts and finally move into a better place. You can stay in the guest room until we find you a retirement home." A retirement home. They were evicting me from the house I had built, sending me away like a broken piece of machinery, all while smiling in my face. My legs trembled, but I refused to collapse in front of them. I clenched the cane in my hand, not as support, but as a weapon of dignity. "You think you've won," I said quietly. "You think you've taken everything from me, but you have no idea what I still hold." Their smiles faltered for the briefest moment. Max tried to laugh it off, to treat my words as the ramblings of an old man, but I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. That flicker was enough. I walked past them into my study and shut the door. On the outside, they might think they had cornered me, but inside, I felt the cold steel of determination sharpening. They had underestimated me. They believed age meant weakness. They forgot that age also means experience, patience, and secrets. That night, as I sat alone in the dim light of my study, the memories of the past returned in waves. I remembered building the foundation of that house with my bare hands, the blisters, the sweat, the pride when the first walls rose. I remembered my wife's voice echoing through the empty rooms, filling them with warmth until the house became a home. I remembered my son as a child, laughing, running, hugging me with unconditional love. How had that innocent boy turned into this cold, greedy man? Was it Lena who poisoned him? Or had the seed of selfishness always been there, waiting for the right time to bloom? I opened the drawer of my desk and ran my fingers over a sealed envelope I had hidden for years. My secret, my true protection, my ace in the hole. I whispered to the shadows of the room, to the memory of my wife. They think I am finished. They don't know I prepared for this day long ago. I didn't sleep that night. The betrayal kept replaying in my mind, every word cutting deeper. It will be mine anyway. You should be grateful. Retirement home. They treated me as if my love, my years of sacrifice, my fatherhood had no value. But what they had forgotten was this: love cannot be bought, and dignity cannot be stolen. And if they wanted a war, I was ready to give them one. The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. Max and Lena had left early, probably to meet the agents and finalize their victory. I walked slowly through each room, touching the walls, the frames, the furniture. This was not just wood and concrete. This was my life story. And if they thought I would surrender it without a fight, they were gravely mistaken. When I reached the kitchen, I placed the envelope on the table. The paper was old, but the contents inside were ironclad. Years ago, after my wife died, I had gone to a lawyer I trusted and drafted a will unlike any other. A will that protected the house from exactly this kind of betrayal. My son had no idea it existed. He thought he had outsmarted me, but the truth was, I had outsmarted him before he even tried. And that is how it began. The war between a father and a son. A war not fought with fists, but with secrets, with documents, with the weight of truth. They believed I was powerless. They believed I was old and blind, but soon, they would learn that the old man still had one final move, one secret that would shatter their plans and make them regret underestimating me. The following days were a theater of cruelty. I watched my own son and his wife strut through my house as if it already belonged to them, rearranging furniture, making phone calls to brokers, whispering to each other about how much money they could squeeze out of it. They didn't even bother hiding their joy. They celebrated in front of me, like vultures circling a still-living body. On Saturday, I overheard Lena talking loudly on the phone in the living room. She said, "Yes, we closed it fast. Old people are easy to handle. He won't make a fuss. He doesn't even understand half the documents." Her laughter was like acid in my ears. She called me an old man, easy to handle, as if my entire life, my entire mind, was nothing more than a fragile piece of glass she could shatter at will. She didn't know I was standing in the hallway, listening, memorizing every word. Later that evening, they invited relatives over under the pretense of a family dinner. I thought maybe, just maybe, it would be an opportunity to talk, to appeal to whatever shred of decency still lived inside my son. But I quickly realized it was not a dinner. It was a performance. They wanted witnesses for their triumph. Cousins, uncles, even neighbors showed up, all smiling awkwardly, offering congratulations to Max and Lena for their new fortune. I sat at the end of the table, silent, invisible, like a ghost in my own home. Every time I reached for a dish, Lena's hand would brush mine away with forced politeness, as if I were a guest who had overstayed his welcome. Max stood up, glass in hand, and made a toast. "To new beginnings," he said proudly, raising his voice so the whole room could hear. After years of struggle, Lena and I finally secured our future. We're moving to a bigger house, a better place. We'll finally give our children the life they deserve. Everyone clapped. No one looked at me. Not a single eye turned toward the man who had built the foundation for all of it. I clenched my fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell them all the truth, that this wasn't their victory but a betrayal, that their future was stolen from my sweat, my blood, my sacrifices. But I stayed quiet. Silence, I realized, was more powerful than shouting. Silence gave me time. After dessert, when the guests had left, Max pulled me aside. His smile was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper. "Dad," he said, "we need you to sign a few more papers. It's just procedure, nothing serious, just to smooth the transition." He handed me a folder. Inside, I recognized the trap. Documents that would strip me of any remaining rights, documents that would legally bind me into their plan of eviction. I looked up at him. "And if I don't sign?" I asked calmly. His jaw tightened. Lena, who was standing behind him, crossed her arms and answered for him. "Then we'll have no choice but to place you in a care facility. The court will understand. You're old. You're not capable of handling property anymore. It's the natural way of things. The natural way of things." Their arrogance was staggering. They spoke of me as though I were a burden to be disposed of, not the man who had given them everything. I closed the folder slowly, my hands steady. "I'll think about it," I said. Max seemed satisfied, believing he had cornered me, but Lena's eyes narrowed, suspicious. She sensed something in my tone, something she couldn't name. That night, I didn't eat. I walked from room to room, touching the furniture, the photographs, the walls. Each memory was a wound, but also a weapon. They thought this house was only bricks and wood. They didn't understand it was history, it was proof, it was identity. And identity cannot be erased with a signature. I sat in my study until dawn, staring at the envelope again. The secret will. The paper shield I had crafted years ago in anticipation of exactly this kind of betrayal. It wasn't just a piece of legal text. It was my voice, my power, preserved in ink. The escalation continued the next morning. They began speaking to me as if I were already senile. Lena would say, "Did you take your pills, Dad?" Or, "Don't worry, we'll handle the hard stuff for you." She patronized me with fake sweetness, dripping with venom beneath. Max followed her lead, avoiding my eyes whenever I tried to speak about the past, about family, about love. For him, love was a currency that had already expired. One afternoon, I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. Lena was furious. "Why hasn't he signed yet? What if he changes his mind? What if someone else gets involved?" Max tried to reassure her. "He's too weak. He won't fight back. He's just clinging to memories. Give it time." She wasn't convinced. She hissed, "You better control him. If this deal falls apart, it's on you." I realized then that Lena wasn't just part of the plan. She was the architect. Max had become her puppet, blinded by her ambitions, deaf to his own conscience. But that didn't absolve him. He chose betrayal. He chose greed over blood. Days stretched into weeks, each one tightening the noose around me. They began removing my belongings, packing boxes without asking me. They sold my wife's piano, the one she had played every Sunday, claiming it took too much space. They took down family photographs and replaced them with modern art they bought on credit, pretending to be sophisticated. My home was becoming unrecognizable, a hollow shell of what it once was. But while they thought they were erasing me, I was preparing. Quietly, patiently, with the discipline of a man who had survived wars and losses, I gathered every piece of evidence I needed. I photographed the documents they had forged. I recorded Lena's phone calls. I noted the dates, the times, the witnesses, and most importantly, I kept the envelope close, never letting it out of my sight. I wasn't ready yet to reveal my hand. Timing was everything. If I acted too soon, they would find a way to twist it, to paint me as delusional. But if I waited, if I allowed them to walk deeper into their own arrogance, then when the truth emerged, it would hit them like a storm they could not escape. I could see it in their eyes. They thought I was finished. They thought I was trapped, helpless, old. But what they didn't understand was that age had taught me patience, and patience is the deadliest weapon of all. And so, I let them celebrate. I let them mock me. I let them pack away my memories and count money that was never truly theirs. All the while, I whispered silently to myself, "You think this house is your victory. You think my silence is weakness. But you have no idea. You have no idea what storm is about to break over your heads." I had always believed in preparation. Perhaps it was the soldier in me. Or maybe just the instinct of a man who had seen enough storms to know they always return when you least expect them. Years ago, after my wife passed away, I had visited my old friend Harold, a lawyer who had helped me draft every important document of my life. That day, grief weighed heavily on me, but Harold reminded me of something simple yet profound. People are never more dangerous than when they smell inheritance. I remember his words clearly, the way he leaned forward and tapped his pen on the desk. If you want to protect your dignity, you must prepare for betrayal, even from your own blood. So I prepared. I drafted a will unlike any other. It was not just a distribution of property, it was a fortress built out of paper and law. In that will, I made sure the house, the land beneath it, and every piece of it was shielded from greedy hands. My son would not inherit it automatically. Instead, I left it to a community foundation in my wife's name, with clauses so ironclad that no trick, no forged signature, no backroom deal could undo it. If anyone tried to transfer ownership without my consent, the entire agreement would be nullified. Harold called it bulletproof. I called it my final weapon. For years, I kept that envelope hidden in the back of my desk, behind old letters and dusty photo albums. And when Max and Lena began circling like vultures, I knew it was time. The moment came sooner than I expected. One cold afternoon, I returned from a walk to find a moving truck parked in front of the house. Strangers were carrying out boxes, loading them onto the truck, my belongings, my memories, my life. I stormed inside, furious, and found Max directing them like a general leading soldiers. "Dad, don't make a scene," he said when he saw me. "We need to clear space for the new owners. The deal is done." I demanded he stop, that he had no right. He waved a document in my face. "It's all legal, signed and sealed." But I knew better. I recognized the cheap ink, the shaky forged version of my signature. For a moment, rage nearly consumed me, but instead of shouting, I smiled. It was the first time in weeks I had smiled, and it unsettled him. "Is something funny?" he asked. "Funny?" I said softly. "No, but there's something you don't know." That night, I didn't eat or sleep. I sat in my study, the envelope on the desk, my hand hovering above it like a sword waiting to be unsheathed. I thought of my wife, of how she had trusted me to protect our legacy, our dignity. I thought of Max as a boy, sitting on my shoulders, laughing without a care, and I asked myself, had I failed him as a father, or had he failed me as a son? The next morning, I made a decision. I called Harold. His voice was older now, more fragile, but still sharp. "I was wondering when you'd finally need me," he said. "Bring the documents. Let's remind your son what law really means." 2 days later, Harold arrived at the house. He was hunched, his cane tapping the floor just like mine, but his presence filled the room with quiet authority. Max and Lena were sitting at the dining table, signing what they thought was their victory. They didn't expect a lawyer to walk in. "Who's this?" Lena snapped, her tone dripping with disdain. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is the man who wrote the real story of this house." I laid the envelope on the table. Max frowned, confused. "What's this supposed to be?" I slid it toward him. "Open it." He hesitated, then tore it open. His eyes scanned the first lines, and the color drained from his face. Lena leaned over his shoulder, reading faster, her lips tightening as each word cut deeper. The will was clear. The house was not his, would never be his. Every fraudulent sale, every forged paper, every backroom deal was invalid. The property was locked, untouchable, a fortress of law. What is this?" Max stammered. "It's my will," I said. "Signed, notarized, witnessed, and registered years ago. While you were dreaming of my death, I was preparing for your betrayal." Lena slammed the table with her palm. "This can't be legal. We already sold it. The money means nothing," Harold interrupted, his voice firm. "You attempted fraud. At best, the deal collapses. At worst, you'll be facing charges." For the first time, silence filled the room. Max stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Lena's face turned pale, then red, then pale again. They had thought me powerless, but in one envelope, I had destroyed their illusion. But I wasn't finished. I leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. "You thought I was old. You thought I was weak. You thought you could strip me of my dignity. But what you didn't know is that I have been preparing for this day longer than you've been scheming. You see, Max, I built this house with my hands. I buried my youth in its walls, and I will bury my last breath here before I ever let you take it." He looked like a child again in that moment, not the confident man who had betrayed me. but a frightened boy who realized he had underestimated the father who raised him. The twist was not just the paper, not just the will. The twist was me. The old man they thought broken was standing tall, armed with truth, with law, with dignity. And they had nowhere left to run. I always believed betrayal feels sharpest in silence, when the room is empty and you realize your own blood has cut you deeper than any enemy could. But what I didn't expect was how loud justice could be when the truth finally saw daylight. The confrontation didn't happen in the quiet corners of my study, or over whispered arguments in the hallway. It exploded in a public place where everyone could witness the true face of my son and his wife. It started when the buyers of my house, the couple Max had tricked with forged documents, filed a formal complaint. Their lawyer contacted Harold, who in turn called me. "They want to meet," Harold explained. "They're furious. They claim your son took their deposit and promised them the deed." My heart sank. Not because I felt guilty. I hadn't signed anything. But because I realized Max's greed was dragging strangers into the mud. Harold proposed a meeting at the town hall with the buyers, their lawyer, Max, and Lena. "It will be ugly," he warned, "but if you want closure, this is the time. Do you have the strength?" I thought of my wife's portrait hanging above the fireplace, of the nights I had spoken to her ashes, promising I would protect what we built. "Yes," I said. "I have the strength." The day of the meeting, the hall smelled of varnished wood and stale air. Long tables lined the room, the kind where officials once stamped permits and families signed marriage certificates. I had been there decades earlier to register Max's birth, cradling him proudly in my arms. Now I walked in with a cane, older, slower, but more prepared than I had ever been. Harold walked beside me, carrying the folder with the will. Max and Lena were already there. Max wore a suit too new for his budget, probably bought with the down payment money. Lena sat stiff, her smile strained, her nails tapping the table with restless energy. Across from them sat the buyers, a middle-aged couple who looked both angry and embarrassed, like people who realized they'd been tricked. Their lawyer whispered in their ear until the clerk banged a gavel and called the meeting to order. "Let us begin," the clerk said. "This is an official mediation regarding the disputed sale of property at 27 Willow Lane. My house, my fortress, my life." The buyer's lawyer stood first. "My clients," he said, "paid $75,000 as a deposit for the property, based on documents provided by Mr. Max Richter. We were promised a deed transfer. Now we are told the sale is invalid. We demand clarification." All eyes turned to Max. He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and put on his most innocent expression. "There must be a misunderstanding. My father gave me authorization." "Authorization?" I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. The clerk raised his hand to calm me, but I didn't care. I leaned on my cane and stood, facing my son across the table. "You forged my signature. You sold what was never yours. Do you deny it?" For a moment he faltered. Lena squeezed his hand under the table, whispering something. He straightened again. "Dad, you're confused. You must have forgotten. We talked about this. You wanted me to handle things because it was getting too much for you." "Enough," Harold cut in. His voice carried the weight of decades in the courtroom. He laid the envelope on the table like a judge placing a final verdict. "Here is the original, notarized will of Mr. Richter, signed years before this so-called transaction. According to this document, the property is locked under a foundation and cannot be sold or transferred. Any attempt without his direct consent is null and void." The clerk examined the papers, flipping through the stamped pages. The buyer's lawyer leaned forward, frowning. Max shifted uncomfortably. Lena's smile cracked into a sneer. "This is absurd," she hissed. "You're using an old paper to humiliate your own son. What kind of father does that?" I turned to her, my voice low but steady. "The kind of father who built a home with his bare hands. The kind of father who sacrificed his youth so his family could live with dignity. And the kind of father who refuses to let his legacy be stolen by greed." The room went silent. Even the buyers looked moved, their anger redirected at the real culprits. Max tried to speak, but his words stumbled out like broken glass. "Dad, please, you don't understand. We needed." "You needed?" I interrupted again. "What about what I needed? What about the years I needed a son who respected me? not one who treated me like an obstacle to his inheritance. The buyer's lawyer slammed his folder shut. "My clients demand their money back immediately," he said coldly. "If Mr. Max Richter cannot return it, we will pursue charges of fraud." That was the breaking point. The blood drained from Max's face. Lena whispered furiously, but he shoved her hand away. His mask cracked, revealing the panic underneath. He wasn't the clever manipulator anymore. He was a desperate man caught in his own trap. I almost pitied him, almost. But then I remembered the moving truck, the emptying of my house, the forged documents. I remembered the way he looked at me not as a father, but as a stumbling block. And pity turned to steel. "Do you see, Max?" I said, my voice trembling with fury. "You thought you were taking my house, but what you really sold was your honor. And honor is one thing no man can buy back." Lena slammed her chair back and stood. "This is a setup. You're all against us. He's an old man. He doesn't know what he's signing. That will could be fake." The clerk's voice rang out, sharp as the gavel. "Mrs. Lena Richter, sit down. These are official notarized documents. If you continue to disrupt this mediation, you will be removed." She froze, her face twisted in rage. Max finally collapsed into his chair, his shoulders slumping. The fight was over. The clerk closed the file and spoke. "The sale is void. The house remains the property of Mr. Richter. The buyers may pursue reimbursement directly from Mr. Max Richter, and any further disputes will proceed in court." I stood there, cane in hand, staring at my son. He looked up at me, his eyes glassy with defeat. "Dad," he whispered, so softly I almost didn't hear. "You ruined me." "No," I replied, my voice cutting like ice. "You ruined yourself." The meeting ended, but the confrontation didn't. As people filed out, I lingered, letting the silence stretch. Max tried to approach me, but Harold stepped between us. "Not today," Harold said firmly. "Not ever again without legal counsel." Lena dragged Max away, hissing at him under her breath. The buyers left with their lawyer, promising lawsuits and police reports. Soon the hall was empty except for Harold and me. I sat down heavily, feeling the weight of years crash onto my shoulders. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from adrenaline. Harold put a hand on mine. "You did it," he said. "You stood your ground. You showed them you're not a man to be discarded." I looked around the hall, remembering the day I had registered Max's birth there. The circle of life had closed in a cruel way. But as I sat there, one truth rang louder than any gavel, louder than any lawyer's argument. Dignity is not inherited, not granted, not stolen. It is claimed, and today I claim mine back. When I walked out of that hall, cane in hand, I expected the air to feel lighter, as if the world had finally lifted the weight from my shoulders. Instead, it felt heavier. Heavier because I knew the battle wasn't over. Heavier because I had just burned a bridge that could never be rebuilt. Max and Lena would never forgive me, not for exposing them, not for standing taller than their lies. But as I stepped into the daylight, blinking against the sun, I realized something profound. I didn't need their forgiveness. What I needed was my own. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the will still in front of me, the ink that once seemed like cold legal jargon now glowing like scripture. It had saved me. But more than that, it had given me back something I had been losing without noticing. My dignity. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the same brand I used to share with my wife on winter nights, and I whispered into the silence, "We won, love. We won." The days that followed were brutal. Max and Lena tried to spin the story in every direction. They called relatives, crying, claiming I was manipulated by greedy lawyers. They told neighbors I had gone senile, that Harold was filling my head with lies. They even stormed into the bank one morning, demanding the manager reverse my decision to block their access. But every attempt was met with the same wall: paperwork, signatures, stamps, and the law, my fortress of dignity. Still, there were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how it had come to this. A father fighting in court against his only son. A man of 70 battling the same boy he once taught to ride a bicycle, to throw a ball, to tie his shoes. Where had I gone wrong? Did I give too much? Did I teach him to take instead of to build? These questions burned me, but then I remembered Harold's words. Betrayal doesn't start with you. It starts with their choice. And Max had made his choice. A week later, the consequences began to fall. The buyers filed charges of fraud against him. I received a subpoena to testify. For the first time in my life, I would stand in a courtroom not as a spectator, not as a grieving husband fighting for a pension, but as a witness against my own son. The day I walked into court, my knees trembling, the air heavy with whispers, I felt like I was walking into an execution. But when I raised my right hand and swore to tell the truth, something inside me steadied. I told the judge everything, how I had built the house with my hands, how my wife and I had raised Max under its roof, how I had prepared the will years earlier to protect our legacy. I described the moving truck, the forged signatures, the buyer's desperate knocks on my door. I laid out the betrayal piece by piece, each word carving into the silence of the courtroom like a chisel. Max sat there, his head bowed, his lawyer whispering furiously into his ear. Lena's face was stone, but her eyes betrayed the rage boiling beneath her skin. When the judge finally ruled, his voice was cold and clear. The sale is void. Mr. Max Richter is liable for restitution to the buyers and subject to investigation for fraud. The gavel fell. Just like that, the battle was over. I expected to feel joy, but instead I felt something else. Relief. Relief that the law had spoken. Relief that my house, my dignity, my life's work was safe. As I left the courtroom, the buyers shook my hand, their anger no longer directed at me. Even the judge gave me a nod, as if to say, "You did right." But the true moment of catharsis came later that evening. I was sitting on the porch when a neighbor I barely knew, a quiet woman from down the street, stopped by. She had watched the news, seen my story. She looked at me with something I hadn't felt in a long time: respect. "Mr. Richter," she said softly, "you showed us all something today. That dignity has no age." Her words pierced deeper than any verdict. For years, I had been treated as invisible, a relic, a man past his prime. But now I was seen, not as weak, not as senile, but as a man who had fought for his honor and won. The weeks rolled on. Max disappeared from town, humiliated, drowning in debt he could no longer cover with my money. Lena tried calling me once, her voice as sugar-coated as the day she first called me Dad. I let it ring. I no longer answered phones that carried poison. My circle became smaller but stronger. Harold visited often, bringing stories of old cases. The bank manager checked in, proud that I had stood my ground. Neighbors who had once gossiped in whispers now greeted me with nods of admiration. And for the first time in decades, I began to live again. I took long walks in the park, not because I had errands to run for someone else, but because I wanted to hear the crunch of leaves under my feet. I cleaned out the attic, not to make space for Max's junk, but to rediscover my own past. Old medals, letters from my wife, photographs of a life lived with pride. I even began writing, scratching my story into notebooks late at night, telling myself it might help someone one day. But the greatest victory wasn't the courtroom, or the will, or even the respect I earned. The greatest victory was the silence. The silence of a phone that no longer rang with demands. The silence of a door that no longer opened to intruders. The silence of a house that finally felt like a sanctuary again. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, painting the sky with gold and fire, I poured myself another glass of whiskey. I looked around the house, the walls I built, the floorboards my wife once polished, the porch where I had held my son as a baby, and I whispered, "It's still ours." And in that moment, I realized something I want to tell you now. Dignity is not given by family, by money, or by law. Dignity is claimed by the courage to say no when the world demands you bow. I am 71 years old. My name is Richter. And though my own son betrayed me, though my own blood tried to strip me of everything, I stand here freer than I have ever been. Because no one, not even the child I once raised, can take from me the one inheritance that is truly mine, my dignity. So I ask you, the one listening to my story, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent, swallowed the betrayal, kept paying until nothing was left? Or would you, like me, rise in your final years and show them that age is not weakness, that even the old can fight, and that dignity has no price? Because in the end, the truth is simple. Blood may betray you, money may deceive you, but dignity dignity is forever.